Cincinnati football has had some great coaches over the last few decades, such as Brian Kelly, Mark D'Antonio, and more recently Butch Jones. The guy I want to talk about today, though, is the guy who could potentially be the best of those four, Luke Fickell. Cincinnati football has gotten really good over the past few years, but when Fickell was hired, not many people thought he was the man for the job, and the expectations for him were pretty low. It's safe to say he has blown all those expectations out of the water. He is Cincinnati football on the rise, and in my opinion, he has turned down other Power 5 jobs because of one reason, and that is that Cincinnati could potentially see themselves in the college football playoff under him. Yes, I know it's crazy to think that Cincinnati could actually be a college football playoff team. The Bearcats have a star player in quarterback Desmond Ridder and an ultra-talented defense. Their defensive coordinator was also so good that he took the Notre Dame defensive coordinator job, and it's safe to say there is a ton of talent coming into Cincinnati. They are the best team in the American, and the sky is the limit for the program under Fickell. Today we are to continue my Building a Monster series, as I'm going to highlight the rise of Luke Fickell. My friend Jonathan from Embrace the Grind is going to talk about his time at Ohio State. I'm going to do a deep dive into how he has turned the Cincinnati football program around, his greatest moments so far, and why he could turn the Cincinnati program into a perennial playoff contender in the future. So now, let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan, and he's going to talk about the rise of Luke Fickell and his time at Ohio State.
Thanks so much for having me on, Scott. If you are not subscribed to his channel yet, make sure to click that red button below. Luke Fickell was born on August 18th, 1973 in Columbus, Ohio. He started his playing career at DuSales High School, where he would be named to the first-team All-Ohio team at defensive tackle twice. He would also win the state championship 3 times in wrestling. After high school, Fickell decided to attend his hometown school, The Ohio State. He would redshirt in 1992 before becoming a dominant defensive lineman for the Buckeyes, recording a school record 50 consecutive starts at nose guard. During the 1997 Rose Bowl, Fickell would record 2 tackles while playing in the game with a torn pectoral muscle. Fickell concluded his Ohio State career with 212 total tackles, including 26 tackles for a loss and 6 sacks. During his 4 years in the starting lineup, the Buckeyes posted a combined record of 41-8-1 overall and were 26-5-1 in Big Ten play, with a pair of Big Ten coach championships to their credit. After graduating from Ohio State with a degree in exercise science, Fickell would go undrafted in the 1997 NFL Draft and sign with the Saints as a free agent. During his first year in the NFL, Fickell would tear his ACL, spending the season on injury reserve before the Saints later released him. Fickell would then return to Ohio State, where he would serve as a graduate assistant. Fickell would accept his first full-time coaching position in 2000 at Akron under Lee Owens. Fickell would coach the defensive line at Akron for 2 years before Jim Tressel would hire him at Ohio State. Tressel brought Fickell in to coach special teams in 2002 while also working with the defensive front on the BCA National Championship squad. He was named linebacker coach in 2004 and added co-defensive coordinator duties to his resume in 2005. From 2005 to 2010, Fickell served as Ohio State's linebacker coach and co-defensive coordinator. In 2010, he was named the Assistant Coach of the Year. Then, Tattoo Gate would hit Ohio State, a scandal where players were selling memorabilia to a tattoo artist. Jim Tressel had knowledge of what his players were doing, but decided not to report it because he believed his team could win the national championship, and he did not want to rat himself or his players out, according to Bleacher Report. Tressel was fined $250,000 and suspended for 2 games that would later be bumped up to 5 games. Fickell would be named the interim head coach at Ohio State for the games Tressel was suspended for. Then, Tressel would resign in May, and Fickell was named the interim coach for the whole 2011 season. Fickell did a pretty good job in a tough spot. He was without starting quarterback Terrell Pryor, who had left, while his best receiver, left tackle, and running back were suspended for half the season after Tattoo Gate. Ohio State would go 6-7 and lose the Gator Bowl that season. After the season, Fickell was passed up as the permanent head coach, and instead Ohio State hired Urban Meyer. Cleveland.com wrote back in 2019 that Fickell could have gone 12-0 in 2011, and Urban Meyer still would have been given the job in 2012 if he wanted it. After Meyer came in, Fickell returned to being co-defensive coordinator and linebacker coach. In 2014, Fickell helped Ohio State win the inaugural CFB championship and would coach at Ohio State until December of 2016, when he was named head coach at Cincinnati. I will now turn it back over to Scott to talk about Fickell's time at Cincinnati.
So yeah, Fickell was dealt a tough hand when he was the interim head coach for the Buckeyes, but now he would actually get a chance to build a program, as the Cincinnati Bearcats would hire him after the terrible tenure of Tommy Tuberville. At age 43, Fickell got the job, and he had this to say, Quote, "It's with much pride and humility that I accept the awesome honor of becoming the head coach at the University of Cincinnati. This city, this school, and my family are all Ohio. It's a tough blue-collar state with hard-working blue-collar people that respect an honest and complete effort. That's what they will get from me personally and what they should expect from this football program." As I said earlier, he would replace Tommy Tuberville, who went 4-8 in his 4th year and only won 29 games in his 4 seasons as the Bearcats head coach. Their athletic director wanted a coach with ties to the state of Ohio, experience at a championship level program, someone who's been around developing talent, and most importantly, a hard-working guy who had a lot of integrity and was a family person, and that's exactly what they are going to get in Luke Fickell. So how exactly did the media and the world react to this hire, you may be asking? Here's what Stadium had to say about him getting hired. They said, quote, "He got the job because he played in Ohio and has spent his entire coaching career there. Fickell is an Ohio guy to his very core, which will benefit the Bearcats on the recruiting trail. The 43-year-old has learned from a pair of legendary coaches that include Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer, and he did serve as Ohio State's interim head coach in 2011. But they gave it a B- for the following reasons. Quote, "Fickell's 1 season as the interim head coach in Columbus didn't fully prepare him to rebuild a Bearcat program that has lost its way in recent years under Coach Tuberville. Cincinnati's last 3 hires had prior experience as a head coach, so Fickell represents a new direction for the administration. The biggest knock on Fickell was his lack of experience, and most importantly, the offensive side of the ball. He was always seen as a defensive-minded guy, but in modern college football, defense, you have to have an explosive offense to win games, and some people were very skeptical. The general narrative was that he was an average hire, and by no means could he potentially be an elite coach. But he would prove everyone wrong, and Cincinnati fans are definitely happy with what has happened, so now let's go ahead and talk about his actual tenure. Fickell would have his work cut out for him, as besides a good quarterback in Hayden Moore, he really didn't have a ton of talented players or experienced dudes to carry him through his first season. The Bearcats were not expected to be very good, but they did start the season 2-1, with wins over Austin Peay and Miami of Ohio, and a loss on the road to Michigan. From there, reality hit, as they lost their next 5 games, and at this point, they would have to win their last 4 games if they wanted to make a bowl game. They'd beat Tulane and UConn, but losses to Temple and East Carolina would be the nail in the coffin for the year, as they would go 4-8 with a 2-6 mark in the American Conference. One thing that is worth noting is that his defensive coordinator was Marcus Freeman, and he becomes a big deal later on in today's video. Going into year 2, he would find the future of the program at quarterback in an unheralded recruit by the name of Desmond Ridder. He was barely ranked a top 2,000 player, and no one ever expected him to be a star by any means. At running back, they had Mike Warren, who became a 1,000-yard player, and Khalil Lewis was a really good wide receiver. They were picked to finish 4th in their division, and by the time the season had rolled around, Desmond Ridder was now the starting quarterback over Hayden Moore. Things would get off to a spectacular start, and the future was bright as they would go on the road and beat UCLA for their first game. This changed the narrative immediately, and all of a sudden, maybe Cincinnati was going to be good. They'd follow that up with wins over Miami of Ohio, Alabama A&M, Ohio, UConn, and Tulane, and the Bearcats would actually start out 6-0 in 2018. They'd lose their first game in overtime on the road to Temple, but from there they get right back on track as they go on the road and beat SMU, then beat Navy and South Florida, where they'd once again be ranked number 25 in the country. Fickell had the program on the rise for sure, but UCF was the darling of the American Conference at the time, and they'd have a matchup with the number 11 Knights, and College Game Day would actually come to town for this. If they could somehow win this game, Fickell would be ahead of schedule, and Cincinnati would be the top team in the conference. Unfortunately, they were not quite there yet, as they'd lose 38-13 at the hands of the Knights. They would beat East Carolina to finish with a 10-2 regular season record, before they would beat Virginia Tech in the Military Bowl. It was a spectacular season, as they went 11-2 with a 6-2 mark in the American Conference, and all of a sudden, people viewed Luke Fickell as a legitimate coach. Going into the 2019 season, there was a lot of hype for Cincinnati football. They had added 6 transfers from the portal, signed a 4-star quarterback, and also nabbed a guy by the name of Ahmad Gardner, who has since become one of the best corners in all of college football. They were picked to finish 2nd behind UCF in the American Conference, and they'd have a tough way to open up the year as they'd play UCLA and Ohio State. Just like the year prior, they would take care of UCLA at home, but their road matchup against Ohio State did not go as smoothly. Despite having a little bit of hype to actually win that game, or at least compete, they got shut out 42-0, and in Luke Fickell's return to Ohio State, he got humbled. This would not distract Cincinnati though, as they would go ahead and win their next 2 games, before they would knock off number 18 UCF. They entered the polls at number 25 before they'd beat Houston, Tulsa, East Carolina, UConn, South Florida, and Temple. A lot of these games were pretty close, but nevertheless, they were 10-1. They'd have a huge match against another surging American program in Memphis, as the number 19 Bearcats would take on the number 18 Tigers in the final regular season game. They'd lose this game by 10 points, but they would still qualify for the American Conference Championship, where they just so happened to rematch with Memphis again. They scored 24 points just like the time prior, but ended up losing 29-24. This was definitely a little bit disappointing, but to make up for it, they would beat Boston College in the Birmingham Bowl. The Bearcats would finish 11-3 with a 7-1 mark in the American. Marcus Freeman was becoming a big name as a defensive coordinator. Cincinnati had a lot of young stars, and most importantly, Fickell was now seen as a legitimate Power 5 coach, and he could get nabbed by a bigger program. Mark D'Antonio was a former Cincinnati coach, and he really made a name for himself at Michigan State. After he retired at a fishy time, the Spartans were in need of a new head coach. They are apparently down to Robert Saleh, who was with the San Francisco 49ers, Mel Tucker from Colorado, and Luke Fickell from Cincinnati. No offer had been extended just yet, but the job was Fickell's if he wanted it. He of course considered it, but Fickell was very concerned about the culture at Michigan State, especially with some of the off-the-field stuff that had been happening, and just the overall vibe from the campus. He was not a big fan of that, and I guess did not want to be a coach there, so he turned the offer down. He said, quote, "The bottom line is, first and foremost, it was family. Obviously my family loves it here, and I have a unique situation with the age of my kids. I had to make a selfish decision, but I had to make a decision that was right for my family, and that is to be here. Obviously I have my own opinion on this take, as I do believe that was kind of an excuse not to take the job. But I do believe the cloud around Michigan State is what held him back from taking the job, and he had to find another way to turn it down. At least that's what I thought initially. But then I started to realize something. Luke Fickell is actually a genius. I'm going to get to that a little bit more here in a moment, but for now let's talk about the 2020 campaign. Obviously, Desmond Ridder was back at quarterback, and he became a star during the 2020 campaign. Jared Dokes was a spectacular running back, and they also landed former Alabama transfer Jerome Ford as well. Combining those two with Ridder, they had a very good run game. Ja'Shawn Jackson and Alec Pierce both were young stars, Michael Young transferred from Notre Dame, and Josh Weil emerged at tight end as he led the team with 6 touchdowns. The defense is where things became really good though. Jarrell White would lead the team in tackles, and now they have future NFL guys in Darian Beavers, Kobe Bryant, James Wiggins, MJ Sanders, and Ahmad Gardner. The Bearcats were picked to finish second in the AAC behind UCF, and they would start the season ranked number 13 in the country. They'd easily beat Austin Peay before they'd take care of number 22 Army. They'd win an easy game over South Florida before they'd have a tough road test against SMU. SMU is another program that has taken a rise over the last few years with Sonny Dykes at the helm, and this was going to be a pretty difficult game. There was actually 8,000 fans there, but it had no effect as the Bearcats would beat the number 16 Mustangs 42-13. From there they would play Memphis, who is typically really good, but with Mike Norvell headed at Florida State, they were in their first year under head coach Ryan Silverfield, and it was an easy win for the Bearcats. After that, they beat Houston and East Carolina before a matchup with UCF that would be a really good game. There would be 11,000 fans in attendance for that road game, but this would not stop the Bearcats as they would roll on with a 36-33 win and go to the American Championship game. In that game, they'd be matched up with the Cinderella of the American Conference in 2020, the Tulsa Golden Hurricane. Led by superstar Zaven Collins and former Baylor quarterback transfer Zach Smith, they actually gave the Bearcats a run for their money as they would only lose by 3 points. Because of this, the Bearcats would go 9-0, and when the college football playoff rankings came out, they were number 8 in the country. They get a really good bowl game as they would get a bid to play in the Peach Bowl against the Georgia Bulldogs. They started out really well and actually had a pretty commanding lead in the second half, but they would end up blowing the game, and Georgia's kicker would hit a 50-plus yard kick to win the game and end Cincinnati's Cinderella season. We all knew this was going to happen as schools like Georgia and the Blue Bloods always seem to pull these off, but I was really hoping that Cincinnati would win that game. It showed just how far the Bearcats program had come, as they really gave Georgia all they had, and really honestly played better. Yes, Georgia fans will argue they had a couple of opt-outs, but when you consistently sign top 3 recruiting classes, you should have more talent, better coaches, and more resources available to easily beat a team like Cincinnati every year. Either way, this was very tough for the Bearcats program and their fans, but they will be back in 2021. Desmond Ridder is seen as a potential first-round pick, Ahmad Gardner is seen as one of the top corners in the country, and Alec Pierce is a dude that everyone's saying will break out as a wide receiver and could get drafted next year. I'm obviously forgetting a few guys, and it also needs to be mentioned that Jared Dokes was drafted as well. Cincinnati is starting to produce NFL players, and they're now competing with the big boys in college football. If you look at their 2021 schedule, they have some really tough non-conference games, and it goes to show you that Cincinnati wants to compete with the best teams. They play on the road against Indiana, who is a consensus top 15 team going into 2021, and they also have a road game the following week against Notre Dame. If they can win one of those two games, that'll be absolutely huge for the program, and it would give Fickell that real signature win he's been lacking. From there, their American schedule is not that difficult, as their two hardest games will be UCF and SMU. The biggest blow to Luke Fickell and his program right now is the fact that their defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman is now headed to Notre Dame. Some thought he could potentially take a head coaching job, as he was rumored to be a candidate in the Illinois coaching search, but he eventually landed in South Bend, and he is definitely good. Cincinnati had one of the best defenses in the country the last few years, and also had one of the highest scoring defenses as well. He had developed a ton of great players, and that was the heart and soul of the team. Fickell is a defensive-minded guy, but he needed to find a new defensive coordinator to take over for Freeman, and he has now hired Mike Tressel, who is the nephew of former legendary Ohio State coach Jim Tressel. He retains his offensive coordinator Mike Denbrock, who has been there all 5 years that Fickell has been in Cincinnati, and with Ritter and a lot of these guys back, I expect the Bearcats to have their best team in a long time. So as I alluded to earlier, I said Luke Fickell was a genius for turning down the Michigan State job. If he did take that job, he'd be competing with Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State every single year for the Big Ten championship, and his ceiling is not that high. I mean, yes, he could turn that program into a consistent championship contender, but that is extremely difficult with Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State in your division. If he stays at Cincinnati, he will have that chance. With the college football playoff expansion talks happening all the time now, many do believe that it will be expanded to at least 8 to 10 to 16 teams, and if they do, there will be guaranteed representation for a group of 5 school. When you look at some of the top group of 5 programs right now, you have schools like Boise State, UCF, Memphis, and Cincinnati. I do think UCF with Gus Malzahn will be a serious challenger, but right now, Fickell has the best group of 5 program, and they have been consistently good for years now. If they do get that guaranteed spot, all Fickell has to do is keep the success that he is having right now, and they can be a consistent top 10 team, and if they can continually win the American Conference, they will get that spot a lot. From there, recruiting will go up, as he can promise recruits a chance to play on the biggest stage and win a lot of games, and then from there, the program becomes a bigger and bigger deal, the American becomes a more prestigious conference, and his accomplishments just get bigger and bigger. I truly do believe the group of 5 will get a spot, and Luke Fickell's plan all along is to have Cincinnati competing for that spot. We will have to wait and see though, and with them losing Marcus Freeman, that is a big deal. If they can continue to have the success they've been having, and have a smooth transition after the Desmond Ritter era, then I think Cincinnati football is here to stay, and Luke Fickell is truly building a monster there. At one point, Fickell was not seen as a big-time head coach, as his interim tenure at Ohio State did not go according to plan, and not many people were super high on him when he was hired. He has since proved everyone wrong, started producing a ton of great players, has had a ton of winning seasons, and is now competing with the big boys. He turned down a Power 5 job to stay where he is at, and has a vision for the future, and could have Cincinnati football on top of the college football world someday. This is definitely all hypothetical, but I do believe it'll happen at some point. What do you guys think though? What do you think of Luke Fickell? What do you think of college football playoff expansion? And what do you think of the Cincinnati program as a whole? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section, and check out Embrace the Grind, as he really needs your help to hit 3,000 subscribers, so be sure to take a quick moment to subscribe to him, subscribe to my channel, hit that like button, and check out all my other videos in the Building a Monster series, including my one about Mack Brown in North Carolina. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.